Look at this picture. 2002. Emmitt Smith breaks Walter Payton's all-time rushing record, but he's doing it on a 5-11 Cowboys team that just lost to the expansion Houston Texans. That's not a celebration. That's a crime scene. It's the final haunting image of a fallen empire. Now rewind to 1993. The Dallas Cowboys are back-to-back Super Bowl champs, Hall of Famers at what felt like every position, an unstoppable machine. And here's the part they don't tell you. That roster was a financial cheat code. It was one of the last true dynasties built without a salary cap, an empire constructed under rules that were about to be outlawed. The story you know is about Jerry Jones and Jimmy Johnson's ego clash, and that is part of it. But the real dagger wasn't a personality problem. It was a new NFL rule that made their championship roster impossible to keep together. This is how the Cowboys became the first victim of the salary cap. And for 30 years, the result has been the same. Every Cowboys team is a tribute act, trying to replicate the success of that 1993 roster without the illegal tools that made it possible. To understand the fall, you have to understand the empire. The 92 and 93 Cowboys were one of the last great teams built without a salary cap, an unstoppable machine fueled by unlimited money. When Jerry Jones bought the team in 1989 for $140 million, the franchise was bleeding cash, losing $1 million a month. His solution was simple: spend whatever it takes to win, right now. He didn't just draft well, he bought a championship. The infamous Herschel Walker trade swindled the Vikings for a king's ransom of draft picks. That was the foundation, and then came the real power moves. San Francisco didn't want to pay Charles Haley. Jerry absorbed the contract. Mid-season acquisition of Bernie Kosar? Done. Today, absorbing a veteran contract like that mid-season would blow up your entire salary cap structure for years. Back then, it was just another line item. They could outbid anyone, outspend anyone, and absorb any contract. There was no ceiling. Contrast that with the modern NFL. Today, every team operates under a hard cap, well over $200 million, heading toward $250,000. Back then, Jerry Jones had a blank check. The Cowboys of the early 90s were a perfect storm of Jimmy Johnson's genius talent evaluation and Jerry Jones' willingness to open up the vault. They were the kings of a kingdom that was about to be outlawed. They were playing Monopoly with real money while everyone else was using the fake paper bills from the box, and the league was about to change the game. So you have this perfect partnership. Jerry handles the money and the business. Jerry builds the football team. It's a flawless system. Until it isn't, because winning changes everything. It bought Jerry Jones' desire for credit, and more importantly, control, directly into Jerry Johnson's football domain. The fracture is simple. Jimmy believed the football operations were his, period. It was in his contract. Jerry, after the Super Bowl wins, started holding weekly press conferences, making public statements about player personnel, and according to reports, even tried to renegotiate Jimmy's contract multiple times to gain more roster control. Jimmy refused every time. The tension was a slow burn all through the 1993 season. Then came the moment that broke the machine. March 21st, 1994, at the NFL owners' meetings in Orlando. The story goes that an allegedly inebriated Jerry Jones approaches a table where Jimmy is eating dinner with some former assistant coaches and their wives. Jerry proposes a toast to the Cowboys championships. The table just stares back, giving him dirty looks. Jerry storms off swearing. Later that night, he tells reporters there are 500 coaches who could do what Jimmy Johnson did. This wasn't a drunken spat. This was a conscious choice. At that moment, Jerry Jones chose public credit over the private continuity of his own dynasty. He traded the architect of his empire for the right to say he built it alone. 8 days later, it was over. Jimmy Johnson was out, with a $2 million severance check. Here's the critical insight everyone misses. Jimmy Johnson wasn't just a coach. He was the architect, the master talent evaluator. Barry Switzer came in and won a Super Bowl in 1995, sure, but he won it with Jimmy's players, Jimmy's system. The pipeline that identified and developed that talent, it was now poisoned. The system that built the empire was shattered, so the coach was gone. But the real trap, the one the NFL had set for them, was just about to spring shut. And that trap had a name and a number. The NFL's brand new $34.6 million salary cap. It was introduced in '94 as part of a new collective bargaining agreement, and its entire purpose was to create parity, to stop one rich owner from buying a championship, to stop teams exactly like the Dallas Cowboys. Now, forget the math for a second. Just look at the price tags the NFL just put on their heads. Troy Aikman's next contract? Market value for a franchise QB. Emmitt Smith, the league's best weapon? Pay him like it. Michael Irvin, the heart of the offense? Top receiver money. Deion Sanders, the shutdown corner? Unprecedented dollars. Charles Haley, the pass rush king? A premium. Nate Newton, Darren Woodson, Jay Novacek, the list goes on. Under the old rules, Jerry just writes the checks. Under the new 34.6 mil cap, you can't even afford half that list. So you're the Cowboys front office, and you have to play a brutal game of which legend do we cut? Do you let the triples walk, your entire offensive identity? Or do you dismantle the defense that made you legendary? Choose between Emmitt Smith and Charles Haley. It was a roster construction nightmare that didn't exist a year before. And the cap didn't just limit what you could pay your own stars, it crippled your ability to rebuild. See, when you're that good, you're drafting at the bottom of every round. You're not getting those top 5 picks to reload. Your only way to patch holes was through free agency, using that same limited cap space to outbid other teams for veteran talent. Except now, you had no space. You were cap strapped from day one. This is the critical connection everyone misses. The ego clash removed their genius talent evaluator, Jimmy Johnson, at the exact moment the NFL made drafting perfectly an absolute necessity. You could no longer buy your way out of a bad draft pick. You had to hit on cheap young talent to balance the books, and the guy who was the best in the world at finding it was now gone, fishing in the Florida Keys. The result wasn't going to be a slow, graceful decline. It was a roster about to be picked apart, piece by valuable piece, by the very rules of the league. And the dismantling came almost immediately. You start with the supporting cast, the veteran glue guys. As the cap era began in '94, they couldn't afford to keep linebacker Ken Norton Jr., a defensive cornerstone. He left for the 49ers. Jimmy Jones, a key defensive lineman, gone. By the time they won that third Super Bowl under Barry Switzer in '95, the cracks were already spreading. Then came the real exodus. The summer after that '95 title, the cap forced their hand with the core. They lost defensive tackle Jim Jeffcoat. Even stalwarts like offensive lineman Mark Tuinei, near the end of his career, weren't long-term answers anymore. Cornerback Larry Brown, the Super Bowl 30 MVP, was deemed too expensive and left for the Raiders. These weren't bench players. They were proven championship-level veterans who understood the system, who knew how to win in January. And here's where the Jimmy Johnson pipeline mattered most. Ken Norton Jr. wasn't just a linebacker. He was a 3-time Super Bowl champ who brought championship DNA to the locker room. Jimmy knew how to find guys like that, veterans who could anchor a defense. His replacement? The Cowboys used draft capital on players like Shante Carver, a first-round defensive end who recorded just 14 sacks in 5 seasons. Sherman Williams was supposed to be the next Emmitt Smith. He lasted 3 years and never topped 450 rushing yards in a season. Without Jimmy's eye for talent, the draft picks that were supposed to replace championship veterans became expensive mistakes. The pipeline wasn't just broken, it was producing fool's gold. Look at the post-1995 drafts. They're infamous. Without Jimmy's eye for talent, and with no cap space to cover up mistakes, their selections became busts at a historic rate. First-round picks like David LaFleur, Greg Ellis. Solid players, maybe, but not the game changers you need when your stars are aging and expensive. They were trying to plug holes in a dam that was already bursting. The '96 season is the proof. They scraped to a 10-6 record. They won a playoff game, but then got smacked by the Panthers in the divisional round. They were running on pure reputation and fumes. The empire was crumbling in real time. You could see it. The defense got older and slower. The offensive line weakened. Emmitt Smith was still Emmitt Smith, but he was doing it with less and less help. And that brings us to the final haunting symbol of the entire era. Emmitt Smith, chasing Walter Payton's all-time rushing record, on a 5-11 Cowboys team in '02. Think about that image, the greatest running back of his generation, a living legend, breaking the most hallowed record in football, and his team is a laughingstock. The empire wasn't just over, it was a museum piece, a single brilliant artifact left standing in the middle of ruins. The dynasty had been systematically dismantled, first by ego, then by a spreadsheet, and the man who built it was long gone, watching from a distance as the rules he never had to play by finally caught up to his masterpiece. So let's come back to that image from '02. Emmitt Smith, breaking Walter Payton's all-time rushing record on a 5-11 Cowboys team. It's not just sad, it's a permanent warning carved into NFL history. It's what happens when you build an empire on rules that no longer exist, when you lose the architect who knew how to navigate the new ones, and when ego becomes more valuable than continuity. That image is the Cowboys' legacy now. Not the 3 Super Bowls, not the triplets, not the dynasty. It's a single Hall of Famer standing alone in the wreckage of what used to be an unstoppable machine. And every team in the NFL should look at that picture and remember, the salary cap doesn't care about your history. It doesn't care about your brand. It will dismantle your dynasty piece by piece if you don't adapt. The Cowboys didn't, and 30 years later, they're still paying for it. This is where the story stops being about the 90s and starts explaining the last 30 years of Cowboys football. Jerry Jones, scarred by losing control to Jimmy Johnson, made a vow: never again. He would never cede that much power to a coach. He became the owner and the general manager, playing a completely different game with strict punishing rules. The modern consequence is a cycle you can set your watch to. He gives massive contracts to star players: Des Bryant, Ezekiel Elliott, Dak Prescott. These deals often leave the roster top-heavy and thin in the playoffs, mirroring the exact same problem they had in the 90s, but without the unlimited money to bail them out. They become top-heavy with no depth, and when the playoffs arrive, the lack of a complete roster gets exposed. Every single time. The result? 30 years without even reaching an NFC championship game. Not unlucky, not cursed, just a broken system refusing to adapt. The final sobering point is this: the Cowboys aren't unlucky, they're not cursed. They're a franchise permanently trying to win a game that officially ended in '94. They're using a playbook for a league that doesn't exist anymore, drafted by an architect who left the building 30 years ago. The Cowboys didn't just lose a dynasty. The NFL changed the rules, and they've spent 30 years refusing to read them. Drop a comment if you think Jerry Jones can ever figure it out. Subscribe to Extra Point Explanation for more stories from the game they don't want you to understand.